here today to tell you about the science of nitric oxide and how it improves really all chronic disease, but we focus on cognition and sexual performance because you may not recognize there's a common denominator of vasodilation. So this is kind of the take-home message. If you want to live longer and better, you need nitric oxide. So what I'm going to do in 20 minutes is kind of take you through a 20-year history on the discovery of nitric oxide, and then how we've really led to a better understanding of it, and then how we can actually improve your body's ability to make nitric oxide on its own. So what I like to do is just start kind of with some broad concepts and non-invasive imaging. But when you look inside the human through SPECT scans, you can see, and this is a SPECT scan of the brain. So SPECT scans tell us how well perfused that organ is. So what you want is a nicely contoured brain that shows all parts of that brain are getting adequate blood supply and oxygen. And then on the right, you see an Alzheimer's brain. And there's holes in the brain that are reflective of decreased blood flow. So the genesis of Alzheimer's is loss of cerebral blood flow, insulin resistance, and diabetes. And so that's really secondary to the loss of nitric oxide production. And then if you look at an angiogram, obviously this is an invasive imaging of the coronary arteries, but you can see here this patient has a thrombus in the left circumflex. He went to the cath lab, was perfused, the thrombus was aspirated, and you can see you get normal coronary flow. And if you do this in a timely manner, you can maintain the function of the heart. So this patient not only survived, but thrived after his heart attack because we restored flow in a timely manner. And then if you look a little bit deeper in neurons in patients that suffer from neuropathy, all neurons, whether they're sensory or motor neurons, have blood vessel supply. When you develop microvascular disease, the integrity of those blood vessels become compromised. You no longer perfuse those neurons and you get neuropathy. So the whole point of this is that every chronic disease is characterized by decreased blood flow, but if you can restore blood flow to that organ, you can correct the condition. And so how do we do this? And that's the role of nitric oxide. This is a gas. It's naturally produced in the lining of the blood vessels. It's basically what regulates blood flow to every organ, tissue, and cell in the body. The older we get, the less we make, and that's what's responsible for age-related disease. So it's not only a vasodilator, meaning that it dilates the blood vessels, but it's the mechanism by which hemoglobin in our red blood cells deliver oxygen. So we've all survived COVID for the past 4 years, and what happens? People lose blood oxygen saturation, right? They get hypoxemia. You put them on 100% oxygen, you put a mechanical vent on them, you don't improve their blood oxygen saturation. In fact, you killed millions of people by this. And we had a nitric oxide drug in clinical trials, and we could take patients with blood oxygen of 78 and make them 96 within 8 minutes. So they're not deprived of oxygen, they've lost the ability to uptake oxygen, deliver oxygen, which is dependent upon the ability to make nitric oxide. And it's involved in every biological function, and I don't have time to go through all these, but it's the molecule that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. It's a bronchodilator. It's what dilates the blood vessels of the sex organs that leads to engorgement and sexual function in men and women. And it's how our immune system kills off bacteria and viruses or any pathogen. So you can begin to understand if you can't make nitric oxide, there are a lot of things that go wrong. You become immunocompromised. You develop sexual dysfunction. You develop cognitive disorders. You develop metabolic disease. And this discovery was so important that a Nobel Prize was awarded in 1998 for its discovery. Fred Murad, Louis Ignarro, and Bob Furchgott. And Fred recruited me to join the faculty of UT Medical School in Houston back in 2005. And so a lot of the work we did at UT was in the Institute of Molecular Medicine, where we had a drug discovery program. So I'm going to take you through, again, very broadly speaking, because I don't have the time in 20 minutes. But if your body can't make nitric oxide, this is what happens. You develop high blood pressure, erectile dysfunction, vascular dementia, and Alzheimer's. It's involved in insulin signaling and glucose uptake, peripheral artery disease, small vessel disease, atherosclerosis. So you may recognize this is a short list of the major age-related chronic diseases that are poorly managed around the world. These are also the risk factors for people who got sick from COVID. It's not just COVID, it's the seasonal flu. You know, for the last 100 years, there's 30 to 55,000 people that die every year from seasonal flu. Miraculously, in 2020 to 2023, no one died of the flu. But understanding the pathology of vascular biology, we know that the older we get, you start to see this plaque deposition, and the plaque deposition, plaque instability, and plaque rupture is what causes the #1 killer of men and women worldwide, which is cardiovascular disease. So when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, that sets the stage for this onset and progression of vascular disease. Again, the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. And if we can restore the production of nitric oxide, you can actually prevent and regress vascular disease. And then the fundamental question was, well, how do we control and regulate nitric oxide production? Because once we understood this, then we could develop product technology that could produce nitric oxide for you and then fix the reason your body can't make it. And there's two pathways that now we recognize in the human body. There's an enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels. This enzyme converts L-arginine to nitric oxide, and we can use diet as a first-line therapy. The mechanism of action of a plant-based diet, Mediterranean diet, Japanese diet, is because it's providing enough nitrate that the body can then use to make nitric oxide. So one can compensate for the other, but when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide from both pathways, that's what sets the stage for development of disease. Let's focus on this enzyme nitric oxide synthase. The older we get, the less nitric oxide we make from this pathway. And so about the time we're 50 years old, we only have about, or 40 years old, we only have about 50% of the nitric oxide we had when we were younger. Now we understand that we can shift this curve to the left or to the right. We're seeing 20, 30-year-old kids that have a vascular age of a 70-year-old. And then I turned 50 last November, but I've got the vascular age of a 30-year-old. So we now know how to shift this, and this doesn't have to be your future. So this is how this enzyme works, and some of you are probably more familiar with this than you recognize because this is how drugs like Viagra work. So if you consider this to be a cross-section of a blood vessel, the pink part would be the lumen of the blood vessel where the blood is. Then there's a single layer of endothelial cells, and then underneath that is smooth muscle. So when smooth muscle contracts, it constricts the blood vessel. When it relaxes, it dilates the blood vessel. So nitric oxide is a gas. Once it's produced, it diffuses into the smooth muscle, where it activates an enzyme called guanylyl cyclase. And then this enzyme produces a second messenger called cyclic GMP. And that's where drugs like Viagra work, because they prevent the breakdown of cyclic GMP. So nitric oxide turns this switch on, and Viagra keeps it on. That's the reason you're warned against a 4-hour erection and unsafe drop in blood pressure and all the consequences of that. But these drugs have been on the market since 1998, and 50% of the men that are prescribed Viagra don't respond with better erections. The reason they don't respond is because they're not making any nitric oxide here to activate this pathway. So if we restore the production of nitric oxide, Viagra works, and more importantly, you can lower the dose or even wean people off of these drugs because now we have the systems in place to make it work. Now, what about diet? You know, the plants that are grown in the soil assimilate nitrogen in the form of nitrate. So any vegetables that we're eating or any animal proteins that ate the grass or the vegetables that we're consuming now provide a source of nitrogen oxides into the food we eat. And then the human body is a denitrifying organism. So when we eat a plate of spinach sprinkled with a little bacon, here 90 minutes after we consume that, it's taken up in the salivary glands, and now for the next 6, 8, 10 hours after we consume that meal, we secrete nitrate in our saliva. The bacteria that live in the mouth reduce the nitrate to nitrite. When we swallow our saliva, as long as there's stomach acid, we produce nitric oxide in the lumen of the stomach. So this completely overcomes the dysfunction of the enzyme and provides a compensatory redundant pathway to make nitric oxide. But here's the problem. 2 out of 3 Americans wake up every morning and use mouthwash, killing the oral microbiome. And there's 2 out of 3 Americans that have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. It's not coincidental, it's causal. There's another 200 million prescriptions written for antacids every year, completely shutting down nitric oxide production. There's data now showing that people who have been on antacids for 3 to 5 years have 40% higher incidence of heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's because it's completely shutting down nitric oxide production. And here are the data. If we take normal intensive patients, all we do is give them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days, their blood pressure goes up. And an elevation in blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for the #1 killer, cardiovascular disease. And this makes sense because the microbiome outnumbers our own human cells 10 to 1. And the bacteria are expressing 3 million gene products, where the human genome only codes for 23,000 gene products. So these bugs that live in and on our body are there to do things that we as humans can't do. So about 15 years ago, we started a study at the Texas Medical Center just doing tongue scrapings. Can we culture these bacteria that are responsible for regulating blood pressure? And do some people have these bacteria and some people not? And we published this 10 years ago, but the people who had the best blood pressure had the best microbiome. In fact, there were nitric oxide producing bacteria that we could detect, we could culture, and we could quantify in these patients. The people who had the highest blood pressure had the least diverse oral microbiome. And these were the people that were on mouthwash, antacids, had oral infections. So this is association, but it's not causation. So then we went back and we took young, healthy, normal-tensive patients, gave them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days, and then stopped for 4 days and brought them back. And we published this 3 years ago, but 7 days of mouthwash use, we caused a 26 millimeter increase in blood pressure. This was a 21-year-old dental student, plant-based diet, triathlete, and we made him clinically hypertensive just by giving him mouthwash. And we picked up the bacteria that disappeared when his blood pressure increased, and 4 days later, after we stopped the mouthwash, his blood pressure completely normalized. And we sequenced these bacteria. They were expressing the nitric oxide producing genes. And this explains resistant hypertension. So if you have high blood pressure, you go to your doctor, he puts you on an ARB, an ACE inhibitor, calcium channel antagonist, but yet 50% of the people that are on medication don't respond with better blood pressure. And it's because the hypertension is a symptom of oral dysbiosis. So now for the first time in the history of medicine, we can talk about getting patients off of drugs. Because now if you have hypertensive patients, you ask them, are you using mouthwash? 2 out of 3 people say yes. Do you have fluoride in your toothpaste? Everybody says yes. Fluoride's an antiseptic, it kills your thyroid, and it shuts down, it's a neurotoxin. So now you get people off mouthwash, eliminate fluoride, 30 days later their blood pressure is normal. No need for medication. And this is just, and when we're looking at cognition or sexual function or diabetes or autoimmune disease or cardiovascular disease, the common denominator in all these are low blood flow, inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. And nitric oxide is what controls and improves all 4 of these. So in the last 5 minutes, let me just show you how we've taken that information and really innovative, unique product technology that we have on the market, and we're developing these as FDA drugs. But to understand inflammation and chronic disease, we have to be able to look inside the blood vessel. Because inflammation is when the blood vessels become like Velcro. Everything sticks, platelet becomes aggregated, you get microclots, and you get inflammation. And we were able to visualize this back in 2009. We could induce vascular inflammation from a poor diet. So this is basically eating a McDonald's type meal every day, or Whataburger or pancakes for breakfast. And you can see here there's a lot of monocytes and neutrophils that have stuck to the lining of the blood vessel. A lot of cells have migrated through. But if we take that same atherogenic diet and we just give nitric oxide or restore nitric oxide, you can see that blood vessel is more dilated and they don't stick and they don't migrate through. So you completely suppress the inflammatory response to a poor diet simply by providing nitric oxide. So our strategy's been different. If your body can't make nitric oxide, then we have to do it for you. And then we have to fix the function of the enzyme, and we got to restore the oral microbiome to enhance nitric oxide production. And our nitric oxide lozenge and product technology achieves all 4. So this is not like taking testosterone, which shuts down endogenous production. We actually improve the body's ability to make nitric oxide when you take our product technology. And this is really the only solid dose form of nitric oxide gas. So my claim to fame is I've made a solid dose form of bioactive gas. You put this lozenge in your mouth, it dissolves over 5 minutes, and we're releasing nitric oxide. We're not giving you precursors and substrates and crossing our fingers and closing our eyes and hoping your body can make it. This does it for you. But we can quantify it, we can detect it, and we can verify it. And it's vasoactive. So if we give, this is a picture of the carotid with an ultrasound, and you get baseline internal luminal diameter. 10 minutes after the lozenge, you see a 13% increase in blood vessel diameter. That's a 34% increase in blood flow to the brain. So you take that SPECT scan of an Alzheimer's patient, 30 days later, you completely reverse it to normal perfusion. Microvascular disease, this is a 49-year-old female chronic smoker with Raynaud's, cold hands, cold feet. 10 minutes after the lozenge, we open up the microcirculation. I'm going to take you very quickly through a pediatric study we did at Texas Children's Hospital years ago. These poor kids are born with an enzyme deficiency called arginosuccinate lyase. They do very poorly. They'll die at 7 or 8 years of age without liver transplants. But they develop other problems. They have blood clotting disorders. They have resistant hypertension. They have kidney disease. So these physicians came to me about 20 years ago trying to explain how could these kids be presenting with so many clinical problems when it couldn't be explained by their underlying genetic disorder. And we solved this riddle. We published this in Nature Medicine in 2011. But this enzyme that these kids are missing is what tethers the eNOS enzyme to the membrane. So in these patients that don't have ASL, this protein complex falls apart and they're completely devoid of any nitric oxide. So now when you look through the lens of nitric oxide deficiency, that explains every single one of these clinical symptoms. And we treated these patients. This is a blood pressure profile of one patient. You can see at 5 years of age, he was diagnosed, put on standard pharmacotherapy, and for 10 years had uncontrolled hypertension. He came to Texas Children's in February of 2010 in the pediatric intensive care unit, a 15-year-old with blood pressure of 210 over 115. And no medication would lower his blood pressure. So we started dosing him with the lozenge. 4 hours later, we completely normalized his blood pressure. We followed him out for 21 months. We published this in the American Journal of Human Genetics, and we saved this 15-year-old kid's life when the physicians were out of therapeutic options. So even in a complete deficiency of nitric oxide due to a genetic disorder, the lozenge completely rescued the phenotype. His kidney disease resolved within 5 days. His heart disease completely resolved within 5 months. So as a 15-year-old, he had a heart twice the size of the normal 15-year-old. 5 months later, normal size, normal function. We mobilized stem cells, completely repaired the heart. And then in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about our topical nitric oxide that we have on the market for fine lines and wrinkles and aesthetics, but we're also developing this as a topical drug for diabetic ulcers and non-healing wounds. But nitric oxide is a gas. These are our line of nitric oxide products. We make a dual chamber nitric oxide serum. You mix both sides of these chambers. When you mix it together, it produces NO gas. 5 published clinical trials. This is using the serum twice a day for 30 days. Age spots disappear. Inflammation on the neck, tone, texture, and clarity improve. The varicosity, this is broken blood vessels in a 50-year-old Hispanic. This lady had a facelift, spent about $20,000, then went back to the office, started smoking and applying pressure here on her chin, developed a full thickness ulcer. And applying the serum 3 times a day for 10 days, we completely healed the wound. Polycystic acne, this poor lady dealt with polycystic acne for 3 years, no resolution, 30 days, completely resolved it. This is a 15-year-old scar from teenage acne. 30 days of using the serum, we mobilize stem cells, remodel the skin, and get pretty good resolution of 15-year-old scars in 30 days. So let me just wrap up here, and then we'll have maybe a minute for questions. But you got to do 2 things to improve nitric oxide. Stop doing the things that disrupt it. Get rid of mouthwash, get rid of fluoride, stop using antacids, and stop eating sugar. There are companies out there trying to sell you nitric oxide gummies, chews. The last thing Americans need is more sugar. Turn off your TV. Don't listen to the commercials. They're selling you junk. And then throw in some more green leafy vegetables, moderate physical exercise. These are nitric oxide line of products. Again, if your body can't make it, we do it for you. None of these products, even though they say nitric oxide, they provide 0 nitric oxide. I've tested almost every nitric oxide product on the market. In fact, we use a lot of these as placebos in our clinical trials. And this is just another long laundry list of products that say what we say, but don't do anything that we do. So buyer beware. So nitric oxide controls and regulates vascular structure and function. The older we get, the less we make. Most so-called nitric oxide products don't work, and any health optimizations should include nitric oxide as a foundation. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. Ignorance is curable. That's why we're here. It's just a lack of information. But stupidity is really hard to overcome, and it's not only hard to overcome, but it's dangerous. And it's the greatest enemy of knowledge. So with that, I'll leave you with a couple of references here. If you got any questions we don't get answered, we're at the booth. What's our booth number? 15 out in the main hallway. But thank you very much for your time and attention.